Hello, and welcome to A Reader's History of Science Fiction. I'm Alex Howe, and this is Season 2, Episode 19, Multiverse Fiction. I spoke in the last episode about last year's hit movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which had a wide-ranging plot that delved heavily into the idea of the multiverse. In discussing that movie, I realized that the multiverse is one area of science fiction that I haven't addressed in detail yet, so it was the natural topic to talk about in this episode. There are a lot of different ideas out there about a possible multiverse or multiverses. Perhaps one of the most famous from the realm of real physics, to the extent that any of this could be called real, is Max Tegmark's 4 levels of the multiverse, ranging from an infinite regular universe where every combination of particles has to repeat over large enough scales, to his mathematical universe hypothesis, where every possible mathematical structure represents its own universe. I briefly discussed this idea in Season 1, Episode 39. However, to be honest, I've always found Tegmark's classification to be lacking, not adequately capturing the ideas of the multiverse advanced by things like string theory and brane cosmology. In researching this episode, I stumbled across Brian Greene's classification of 9 types of multiverse, which I find much more compelling. One of his categories even covers virtual alternate universes, like in The Matrix. Regardless, multiverse theory posits multiple universes that are out there somewhere beyond our own. Sometimes they are very similar to ours, but with small differences. And sometimes they're so different that they don't even make sense by our standards, like the Paint universe in Multiverse of Madness. There's probably a mathematical structure of some kind that could describe that, and depictions of the multiverse in fiction similarly run the gamut. But I think there's also a classification of multiverses, or more broadly parallel universes, to be had in fiction as well, which is a bit different from the classification in physics. And I say that parallel universes are a broader topic because they're often invoked without reference to a larger multiverse. In this episode, I want to focus on media about the multiverse proper, but we should take a bit of time to look at the other categories. First up, we have the fantasy or spiritual otherworld. These are worlds that by modern standards could be considered parallel universes, but that don't occur in science fiction, and in fact far predate science fiction. The idea of an alternate world that is out there somewhere, that is unseen but can perhaps be accessed by magical or spiritual means, is a very old one. Most major religions have a heaven and hell, and some, like Hinduism, have many such realms. And in fact, even the Christian Bible refers to a place called the third heaven. Likewise, not strictly religious notions of the idea also come from ancient folklore, such as the Celtic otherworld, the Norse 9 worlds, or what in the Middle Ages was named fairyland. Sometimes you'll see these ideas picked up by science fiction, as in the Thor comics and movies, or the Cthulhu mythos, but mostly this is the realm of fantasy. The second category is a work that references only a single parallel universe. This is a little fuzzy. In my experience, they'll rarely say there's only the 2 universes, but they also won't really reference them as being 2 of many. They certainly won't discuss any others as having any bearing on the plot. The classic example of this is the mirror universe in Star Trek, where everything is reversed. Not physically, well, the Enterprise is orbiting the opposite direction, but mainly morally. The Federation is replaced by a brutal empire. Kirk is a murderous tyrant. The female officers somehow show even more skin, and Spock has a beard, and is also a member of an oppressed vassal race. Many later TV shows had homages to the mirror universe, complete with giving the evil counterpart a goatee. In fact, these often take the concept even further, with the heroes becoming villains and the villains becoming heroes. But this is only one form of parallel universe you can have. The TV show Fringe had a single parallel universe that was the same as ours, except a decade or 2 ahead in technology. Stranger Things has the characters connect with a twisted, eldritch version of our universe called the Upside Down. Even further afield, Isaac Asimov's The Gods Themselves has the action centered around a single parallel universe, where the laws of physics are very different from our own, and the dominant life forms aren't entirely solid. I should also reference here an early work of science fiction, Edwin A. Abbott's Flatland from 1884, which shows a detailed construction of a world that exists in 2 dimensions, with its own physics. This is a weird one, both because it's about as far from our universe as you can get, and it also takes place almost entirely in Flatland, with only brief references to our world. But other than Flatland, the earliest true science fiction story that Wikipedia cites as featuring a parallel universe is H.G. Wells's novel Men Like Gods from 1923, which also features a single parallel universe, although it does share a lot in common with another of his books, A Modern Utopia, from 20 years earlier. I mentioned that one in the alternate history episode. In Men Like Gods, which is more properly a novel than A Modern Utopia, several men are transported to an alternate Earth called Utopia, where history played out the same way except for small details, but technology is far advanced from our Earth, and everyone lives in a seemingly perfected society. You may be able to guess that the utopian or dystopian parallel universe is also a common trope. The next category of multiverses are ones where time travel generates alternate timelines, which could count as alternate universes. This can be a single alternate timeline, like in the Back to the Future series, where Biff becoming rich creates a bad future, or it can be many alternate timelines, like the Terminator series, where the continuity keeps getting changed with every new movie. I of course talked about these stories in my episodes on time travel. Closely related to these are alternate history stories, which take place entirely in an alternate timeline and usually don't make any reference to other worlds. They're just stories written from the fictitious perspective of history having gone differently. I don't really consider either of these to be true multiverse stories, being time travel stories first and foremost. However, they both stem from the same idea in physics that underlies the possibility of a real-life multiverse, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by Hugh Everett in 1957. In the many worlds interpretation, every decision you make, indeed every random event that happens, at least on a macroscopic scale, splits off a new universe in a quantum multiverse, occupying the same physical space, but with a different quantum phase from all the others, which makes it impossible for them to interact. I've linked a YouTube video from PBS Spacetime that explains it in more detail. The many worlds interpretation allows alternate timelines created by time travel, where going back in time just creates more quantum branches. And it allows alternate histories, where a random event in the past set history on a different course. And it may be the nature of the world we live in, although many physicists disagree, and most physicists believe there's no way to test it. But on top of this, it also allows characters in stories to jump from one quantum branch to the next to explore a true multiverse of infinite possibilities. It's not the only way to do multiverses in sci-fi, but most of the others are functionally equivalent in terms of the story. The earliest work cited by Wikipedia as a true multiverse story seems to be the short story Sideways in Time by Murray Leinster from 1934. In this story, various parts of Earth are replaced by a patchwork of alternate versions from parallel timelines, including the ever-popular examples of the timeline where the South won the Civil War and the timeline where the Roman Empire never fell. This form of multiverse is also quite popular, at least in the sense that many science fiction franchises have featured it at some point as a one-off. For example, in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Parallels, Worf is exposed to a space-time fissure that causes him to jump between half a dozen parallel universes over the course of the episode, eventually leading to a final scene where the fabric of reality breaks down, with millions of Enterprises appearing in the same space, and they have to reseal the fissure before everything is destroyed. A similar notion to the threatened apocalypse in Spider-Man No Way Home, in fact. In addition to one-offs, you sometimes get multi-episode arcs featuring the multiverse on long-running sci-fi shows. Stargate featured a device called a quantum mirror that allowed access to all of the parallel quantum realities and was featured in several episodes. And of course there's Doctor Who normally travels time and space in our own universe, but periodically gets shunted to a different one for various reasons. However, what I really want to look at is media that puts a central focus on the multiverse. That means looking at TV shows and books and movies that deal with the multiverse in ways that aren't simple one-off episodes, or mirror universes, or time travel. And also leaving aside fantasy series like Buffy and Supernatural that have also used parallel universe plotlines, since this is a science fiction podcast. The list of examples that meet all of those criteria is quite a bit shorter. Some of these works I've mentioned before, like Olaf Stapledon's Star Maker and Douglas Adams's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, although in both of those the multiverse part only takes up part of the storyline. Or the Amazon adaptation of The Man in the High Castle, which added the dynamic of people traveling to alternate timelines, which was not in the book, except for one character having a dissociative episode. And of course, there's the aforementioned Everything Everywhere All at Once. Most of the others on my list, though, I unfortunately don't have a lot of experience with, so a short overview will have to suffice for them. I admit this is not an ideal situation. I may have shot myself in the foot by springing this episode topic on myself with only 2 weeks' notice, but I'm kind of committed at this point. My main question here is, what do writers do with the multiverse concept when they really embrace it? And I'm hoping I can find some clues from a high-level survey of the literature. First, chronologically on the list I assembled is a Robert Heinlein classic, The Number of the Beast from 1980. And from reading the summary, it seems like The Number of the Beast is a weird one even for Heinlein. It begins with characters named after John Carter and Dejah Thoris from A Princess of Mars, a car bombing, a Vegas wedding, and then getting into the meat of the plot where they use a quote-unquote continua device, which gives access to higher dimensions to travel to other universes. Except Heinlein uses the innovative strategy of having those parallel universes be other fictional universes. The characters visit the Land of Oz, the actual Barsoom from A Princess of Mars, and Heinlein's own future history timeline where they meet Lazarus Long. The number of the beast here is not 666, but 6 to the 6 to the 6th power, unusually evaluated left to right, which is supposed to be the number of universes accessible by the continua device, approximately 10.3 octillion. And the general consensus for the number of the beast seems to be that it is not recommended. If you believe Wikipedia's selection of reviews of the book, it's either pretty bad or a very clever satire of science fiction narrative conventions. So it's kind of hard to judge where this one's going, but I do think the literary multiverse is quite innovative. Jasper Fforde relied on a similar premise in his Thursday Next series, for example. So maybe that's Heinlein's biggest contribution here. Next on my list is the television show Sliders. Sliders aired from 1995 to 2000, with 3 seasons on Fox, where the episodes were aired horribly out of order, seems to be a theme with them, and 2 seasons on the Sci-Fi Channel. The premise of the show is that the 4 main characters are accidentally sucked through an experimental wormhole device to a parallel universe. Due to complications, they are unable to reach their home universe again, so they have to keep jumping from one to the next, with the device's timer giving them a variable amount of time each time before opening another wormhole for a quote-unquote slide. With no time to try to dive into the series, I read through all of the episode summaries instead. The general pattern of the show is that the characters travel to a different universe pretty much every episode, and they frequently interact with doubles of themselves from the local universe, causing them even more problems. There are a wide range of universes depicted. Many of them are simple alternate histories. Others are suffering from sci-fi disasters such as an alien invasion, which later becomes a major plot thread across multiple worlds. A few are futuristic, with sliding technology in widespread use, while others are Luddite worlds that hate technology. Some are fantasy worlds where magic is real, and the last episode, spoiler alert, has the Sliders land in a world where there's a TV show about them. What can I conclude from all this? From the sounds of it, Sliders seems like a universe of the week kind of deal. Something you could do with Doctor Who or Star Trek just going to other planets, except for the bit about characters interacting with their doubles. So maybe not something quite as groundbreaking as Everything Everywhere All at Once, or even The Number of the Beast. However, it does highlight a common trope of multiverse fiction, which we also saw with the Mirror Universe earlier, alternate universe doppelgangers. In standard alternate histories, the butterfly effect is usually in play. The same people won't exist in alternate timelines for, biological reasons that you can probably guess. But in multiverse stories, the parallel universes frequently feature the same people in different roles and circumstances, even though the histories that led up to them have been wildly different for centuries. That, of course, is possible in the quantum multiverse, because everything is possible in the quantum multiverse, but it's vastly less likely than normal butterflies. Anyway, next up is the Long Earth series, a series of 5 science fiction books written between 2012 and 2016 by a most unlikely duo: accomplished hard sci-fi writer Stephen Baxter and the famous fantasy satirist Terry Pratchett. I haven't read these either, but maybe I should have. They've been on my radar since they came out. The Long Earth is actually an idea that Pratchett came up with at the start of his career, but set aside due to the success of Discworld. And here I think we have an idea that really explores the multiverse in a new light. The premise is that a technology is discovered that allows people to travel to alternate Earths, described as east and west of our world, Datum Earth. There are millions of parallel Earths, all of which are uninhabited by humans, although a few are inhabited by other intelligent life. The so-called stepper device is easy to build, and the designs are posted on the internet, so soon everyone can up and leave for a virgin Earth with untapped resources. The books deal with the changes to society of suddenly opening up such vast tracts of space as humans colonize the Long Earth and eventually come into conflict with other species. And this is a different take on the multiverse idea than the usual alternate histories. In some ways, it's closer to the Star Trek notion of sci-fi, exploring and colonizing the galaxy. But space operas almost never make it so easy to travel from planet to planet, and they tend to have a much higher concentration of aliens. Maybe Stargate comes closest to this idea, but it's still nowhere near where the Long Earth is. Meanwhile, one of the most famous multiverse-themed works from recent years is undoubtedly Rick and Morty, an ongoing animated show that has aired on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim since 2014. Rick and Morty follows the exploits of Rick Sanchez, an alcoholic, sociopathic mad scientist, and his 14-year-old grandson Morty Smith, as they travel the multiverse together. Rick and Morty, as you may guess, were based on Doc and Marty from Back to the Future, or more specifically from a very not family-friendly parody video of those movies. In the show, Rick has engineered things so that he lives in a section of the multiverse where he is always the smartest man in the universe. But he has a tendency to use his vast scientific knowledge in selfish and even cruel ways. The show as a whole is famous for its absurdist humor, but also for its exploration of nihilism in the face of an infinite multiverse. For example, as early as the 6th episode, Rick accidentally causes 3 global plagues that mutate everyone into Cronenberg monsters, called so by name. He finally gives up on trying to fix that world and takes Morty to a new, almost identical universe where they kill their doppelgangers and take their places. That's not without consequence, but you still wouldn't expect move to a replacement universe to happen so casually. I feel like there's also some commentary in there about cartoon continuity, where anything bad that happens is mysteriously fixed by the next episode. The point is, much like Everything Everywhere All at Once, Rick and Morty asks the question, if every possibility exists out there in the multiverse, and you can just go to a replacement universe if something goes wrong, does anything really matter? I don't know enough about the show to say if it really answers that question, but some hints I'm seeing suggest it is moving that direction. And oh yes, there's one other genre where multiverses are hugely important: comic books. Comic books and their derivatives are riddled with parallel universes. The original idea behind the multiverse in comics was to make it easier to have crossover events, where characters who canonically do not live in the same world can interact. This has even allowed crossovers between DC and Marvel comics in a few cases, although it's usually within the same company. And in DC in particular, they also found ways to use it to fix continuity issues. In DC Comics, the multiverse was first introduced in 1961 with Flash of Two Worlds. And you may be aware that the multiverse remains a major part of the Flash's continuity to this day, with both the TV show and the upcoming movie featuring it heavily. In Flash of Two Worlds, the rebooted Silver Age version of the Flash, Barry Allen, travels to a parallel universe and meets the Golden Age version of the Flash, Jay Garrick. This was only the first of many multiverse-based crossovers for DC, which grew more and more ambitious as time went on, ultimately leading to the 1985 limited series Crisis on Infinite Earths. By 1985, the Silver Age versions of the popular heroes had been saving the world for 20 or even 30 years. And even if the writers didn't particularly worry about the characters aging, again, cartoon logic, the continuity problems had been piling up for a long time. One of several motivations for Crisis on Infinite Earths was that it allowed DC to clean up its continuity and modernize its characters by invoking a new universe, without doing a full reboot of the franchise. It worked so well at doing that, and at making money of course, that they eventually followed it up with Infinite Crisis in 2005 and Final Crisis in 2008. DC ultimately did attempt a full reboot in 2011 with its New 52 initiative, but they returned to the old continuity with DC Rebirth in 2015. Marvel Comics, famously, also has a multiverse, although it does things a bit differently. You see, Marvel doesn't reset its continuity with Crisis events. Instead, they use what they call a sliding timescale, another staple of longer-running cartoons where you might see things like technology advancing over the course of the run. In Marvel's sliding timescale, everything that has happened in the long history of Marvel Comics, the origin stories, the comics versions of Ultron, Civil War, the Infinity Saga, the works, is held to have happened in roughly the past 10 to 15 years of in-story time. That way, they don't have to worry about losing a 75-year-old Spider-Man to a nursing home. It's not a perfect system. They keep having to find ways to de-age Magneto to preserve his backstory as a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor. And it still doesn't explain what he was doing for all those years between his real-world introduction in 1963 and the late 2000s when the continuity currently starts. But the point is, Marvel uses its multiverse in a different way. Surprisingly, it was a lot harder to find information about the publication history of the Marvel multiverse. As far as I can tell, various characters, including the Avengers, featured in stories involving single parallel universes throughout the 70s and maybe even the 60s. But the multiverse as we know it today first appeared in an issue of the relatively satirical Captain Britain comic in 1983. In that series, the multiverse was played in large part for laughs, with Captain Britain getting caught up in a multiversal trial where his is just a random one of hundreds of alternate Earths. This is also why DC's Prime Earth is Earth 1, but Marvel's Prime Earth ended up being Earth 616. It was originally meant to be a throwaway storyline where the main Earth wasn't the center. Marvel's multiverse did serve a similar purpose in terms of continuity with the Ultimate Marvel series, a comic book line that told parallel stories with the same characters in Earth 1610. These were modernized versions of the stories with less backstory to learn that were designed to be more accessible to new readers. And of course, there's the usual ability to tell fun crossover stories involving multiple universes. You can see this in recent Marvel movies, with the multi-studio crossover in Spider-Man No Way Home, the ongoing Spider-Verse series, and the current arc of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is setting up an emerging threat to the entire multiverse to one-up Thanos. So, bottom line, the multiverse in comics is another case where it seems to be invoked for its far-reaching narrative options, and not as much deep exploration of the concept. But I'll be interested to see where the MCU takes it, and if it perhaps digs a little deeper. This has been A Reader's History of Science Fiction. This podcast is hosted by Libsyn and is available on all the major platforms. You can find me on YouTube at Science Meets Fiction, on Twitter and Mastodon at SciMeetsFiction, and my website is sciencemeetsfiction.com. Now, because I've read and seen so few of the true multiverse-centric stories that I've talked about here, I'm going to break my usual pattern in this episode and make a book recommendation for myself. By that, I mean I'm going to put it on my own reading list, and I think I feel confident enough to suggest that you put it on your list as well. And that book, you may be able to guess, is The Long Earth. I like both Stephen Baxter and Terry Pratchett as writers, and I like the idea, so I think it will end up being a good read. In the next episode, I want to go back and take one more look at children's science fiction. Specifically, those books that have risen to the level of being considered mainstream literary classics. In other words, next time we will be looking at Newbery Medal-winning sci-fi books. Thanks for listening.